Tonight's Fireside CharLA is being brought to you in partnership with the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles and the United Latinx Fund. Our online event series aims to educate, engage, and advocate for important and timely issues impacting LA's Latinx communities as we experience this time of social change driven by the COVID-19 pandemic and the advancement of equity and inclusion. My name is Ingrid Rivera Guzman, and I serve as the board president of the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles. And I would like to quickly thank our sponsors for tonight's event, Southern California Gas Company, Mercury Public Affairs, and also JP Morgan for their investment and commitment into nonprofits that work to transform, uplift, and improve the quality of life of our community members. And I'd also like to give a very special shout out to our Spanish translation sponsors, Telemundo 52. For tonight's charla, we are centering the conversation around street vending, which form a very important part of our cultural and economic fabric of our economy, but who for a long time, despite of their iconic status, have been criminalized and left out of the formal economy. In 2018, after years of advocacy from street vendors and community-based organizations, Senator Lara passed Senate Bill 946, which decriminalized street vending throughout the state of California. Short after, the city of Los Angeles also legalized street vending and created its own rules and a new permit system to move forward with this. However, many street vendors have still continued to experience many challenges and have found it difficult to navigate this new system. So tonight we will discuss what are some of the challenges and what are some of the policy solutions that we can move forward with to really support our street vendors here. I would now like to welcome the moderator for tonight's event, Mr. Richard Xavier Corral, Interim Executive Director of the United Latinx Fund. Hola, Richard.
Hola, Ingrid. Hola, buenas noches a todos. Good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Corral. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the United Latinx Fund. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, all of our team members, and everybody attending tonight's conversation for what I think will be a very timely, significant, and important conversation. I will ask each panelist to introduce themselves when they first speak. And I have a series of 4 questions that I'm going to be sharing tonight. And we'll follow with some Q&A, and then we'll open it up for a mixer where we'll unmute everybody's audio and video, and we'll be able to have a more informal engagement. So for the first question, I'd like to engage 2 of our panelists, and potentially 3, to talk about some of the current challenges facing street vendors. One of the first folks I'd like to invite to the conversation is Edin Enamorado. If you could please introduce yourself, Edin, and share a little bit about what brings you to today's conversation, as well as some of the challenges that are facing street vendors from your perspective. Edin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Edin Enamorado. I consider myself as a street vendor activist. I've been doing this for a while now on my off time. During my 9 to 5, I do work for 2 universities, but I've been doing a lot of one-on-one work, especially focusing on victims who you've seen on the news in the past 2 years. And I've also been an emotional support for them, and also prevention and guidance that we've been providing for them. There's a lot more individual stories that I do have to share, but that's mainly what we have been doing. And we've also been helping vendors from Avenue 26 and also the vendors from Batata Street who have been displaced from their locations recently. And yeah, and I've been working with them for a minute now, but that's mainly the concerns that we have right now is that they are vulnerable. And even though some laws have been passed and moratoriums have been passed, it seems like city staff has been able to find loopholes in order to still remove them and displace them.
Thank you, Edin. Thank you for sharing that. I want to make sure that we also get the perspective of an actual street vendor. You know, there's one thing to be talking about policy. There's one thing to be talking about laws and rules and regulations. There's another thing to actually have somebody who has experienced this firsthand. And so I'm very thankful that we have a street vendor. Her name is Merlin. We will be offering translation. She's a Spanish, monolingual Spanish speaker, and we will have our translator share her thoughts in English for those of you who are English speaking. Bienvenidos, Merlin.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Merlin Alvarado y soy una vendedora ambulante de la ciudad de Los Ángeles.
Puedes seguir.
Ok, perdón. Y pertenezco a la campaña del colectivo Poder Comunitario, soy miembro activa y activista por los derechos de los vendedores ambulantes.
Activist for the.
Y yo soy la otra cara de la moneda porque aquí hablamos de la parte política y de las leyes y todo. Y yo soy el lado de la moneda que sufro las consecuencias en la calle. Entonces espero que mi participación sea de mucha ayuda. Gracias.
Vanessa, did you want to translate? I think, Victor, if you could switch.
I did. Yeah, she's fine. I'm sorry, everyone. She's fine now. It just took a while for the switch of the notification from Spanish to English, but we were able to hear Vanessa interpret in English. So when Medellin speaks, I'll be better at switching it faster.
Vanessa, do you want to do a quick synopsis, really quick, of Merlin's comments? It looks like we're having some challenges with the interpretation. Apologies for the technical difficulties.
Ya puede empezar, Vanessa.
Otra vez. Vanessa, sigue.
You're fine. No, you're good like that. You're fine.
Pues vamos a seguir. Entonces.
No, you're fine, Vanessa. Go ahead. Sigue.
Unfortunately, we're not able to hear Vanessa, but we're just going to go ahead and move forward. It's all good. Thank you, Victor, for your efforts to make Vanessa accessible to the English speakers. I'd also like to introduce Rudy Espinosa. Rudy, if you could introduce yourself and also share a little bit about, from your perspective, what some of the current challenges street vendors are facing. And Rudy, if you could, there you go.
Thanks for having me, Richard. Thanks, everybody. My name is Rudy. I serve as the Executive Director of Inclusive Action for the City. We are a advocacy organization and an organization that provides low-interest loans to street vendors and other small businesses that can't get capital from other places. And we really care about building a strong local economy in our region. And in that spirit, we were one of the founders, along with Community Power Collective, Medellin and her colleagues, of the LA Street Vendor Campaign that's been working on this issue for over 10 years. As indicated, we had some successes in the past. In 2018, the now State Insurance Commissioner, Ricardo Lara, when he was in the Senate, helped pass Senate Bill 946. He was a champion of that. And as a result of that, cities across the state began to develop permit programs for street vendors and rules for street vendors. But that's only one side of the coin. The other, the coin is the work that our friend and colleague here, Lisa, from the Public Health Department in LA is in charge of. There's also a set of regulatory systems that govern how food entrepreneurs operate. This is not only for street vendors, but also for restaurants and anybody who sells food. And so that is something that we are monitoring now, and we are working with various partners to see how we can also modernize the code where appropriate to support entrepreneurs like Medellin and thousands of street vendors who need support to participate in the economy. We'll cover it a little bit with your support, Richard, in a second, but last week, we released a report that was written by public counsel and the UCLA Law Clinic that is called Unfinished Business, that talks about this issue, that the legalization of street vending has begun, but we still have some work to do, and we need to do that work together. And I'm happy to be here to talk about any of that.
Thank you so much, Rudy. I'd like to move on to our next question, which is how has the pandemic exacerbated existing challenges? And I'd like to invite our resident legal expert and advocate, Christian Contreras. Christian, if you could please unmute and share a little bit about your experience and involvement in street vending, particularly during the pandemic.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christian Contreras. I'm a civil rights lawyer, also a general advocate for the community. Now, in terms of the street vendor dilemma, and I see it as a dilemma because, 2020 was an anomaly in terms of what has happened throughout our existence as humans. Of course, a pandemic and COVID-19 was something unexpected. But one of the biggest things that really upset me and I found outrageous was something that Eden actually works hand in glove with the street vendors, is the violence against the street vendors. And we've all seen these reports, we've seen social media posts of innocent street vendors who are the most marginalized, disenfranchised, and I would argue never enfranchised demographics in our county and state were being targeted by people simply because of, I interpret, frustration and at times xenophobia and even racism towards these people who are simply trying to earn a living. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't look for a job, you're lazy. If you try to find a job, well, you're taking our job. And if you're on the streets vending, well, you're not permitted and you're taking our job. So it's a dilemma because, people who, may not be documented can't find a traditional job. So of course you have nothing else but to resort to street vending. So 2020 really exposed the flaws in our system because yes, it came at the heels of, the implementation of the 2018 Act of the the Sidewalk Street Vending Act, which Congressman Lara enacted, right? So the issue with that though is that it was never fully implemented. So there was a change to the municipal code, but to the actual inspection to the Department of Public Health and through other regulations, regulatory amendments did not occur. So, this issue is so nuanced and I hate to say complex that the average street vendor doesn't even understand how to start the process. So I'll be frank with you all, I was looking into, how to get a permit and I started researching it and I was like, okay, this is not as easy as it looks. So I'm not saying I'm super smart. I do happen to be a lawyer. So imagine a street vendor who may not be as educated as me navigating through that process. So, I love the amendment to the law, but at the same time, it created a further impediment to these street vendors who are already marginalized. And the fact that we see only 1% of people, street vendors who are actually permitted in LA County shows you that how complex that process is. So there's a lot of things that come into this issue. And another part of it too is that, look, this violence towards the street vendors is outrageous. It's unfathomable and, I hate it. So I would petition that through the Ralph Act, which is the state the anti-hate crime law, which makes violence against a protected group a hate crime, I would argue and petition our government to include street vendors as that protected class. So I'll get into it a little bit more, but I will concede some of my time for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And a friendly reminder to all of our panelists, I know we are all very passionate about this topic, but in order for our interpreter to be able to do her job well, we do have to speak slowly. We use our Barack Obama voices and to help our interpreter out. So thank you, Vanessa.
I'm sorry about that.
No,
I should know better because, in court, you have court reporters and you can't really talk a mile a minute.
Exactly. And also a friendly reminder to our support team, if you could put the links to the Facebook pages for both LCLA as well as for ULF, we invite everybody to share tonight's conversation on your social media. There are some folks who are not able to join us via Zoom. That's all good. Sometimes they can tune in on their social. So thankfully we have Facebook Live on the Latino Coalition of LA sites as well as ULF. And so we invite you to, all of us, even panelists, to click on those links in the chat. The other thing I do want to remind you again, like Ingrid had mentioned earlier, we do have a Q&A piece of today's program. So please, if you have any questions, there's been a lot of information that's been already shared. Please do put some of your questions into the chat box. I'd also like to pivot back to Merlin because I also do want her perspective on how the pandemic has exacerbated or made more difficult street vending in Los Angeles. As an aside, in order for the interpretation function to work well, please do press the globe on your menu bar at the bottom of your screen and select your preferred language, if it's English or Spanish. Merlin, how has the pandemic made more difficult your work as a street vendor?
Pues fue algo, como todos lo han mencionado, que no lo esperábamos. Y la clase obrera de los vendedores ambulantes somos personas que no vivimos cheque a cheque, sino que vivimos día a día. Nosotros contamos con lo que ganamos en un día para poder ir sobreviviendo. Entonces, al cerrarse completamente todo, fueron cientos de familias que somos vendedores ambulantes en Los Ángeles. De un día para otro nos quedamos sin comida en nuestra mesa, sin poder pagar nuestros biles, como muchas familias de Los Ángeles o de todo Estados Unidos, ¿no? Pero el que nos quitaran eso no nos dejaba ni poner un plato de comida de ese día en nuestra casa. Entonces fue algo muy, muy difícil y darte cuenta que habían muchas ayudas, pero que el primer requisito era para personas con papeles, era otro agravante muy grave. Otra de las cosas, las ayudas que hubieron, que no te pedían papeles, lo primero que te pedían era un comprobante de ingresos. Como los vendedores ambulantes, comprobábamos que ganábamos $200 a la semana. No nos hacemos un cheque nosotros mismos. Entonces, fue todo en contra de alguien. Y pues cada obrero estaba teniendo sus problemas y no pensaban en esto. Pensábamos nosotros que éramos los que lo estábamos viviendo. Muchos de nosotros nos tocó salir a la calle y me incluyo yo. Yo salí en junio durante la pandemia a volver a vender porque era eso o morirme de hambre en mi casa. Era salir y arriesgarme yo y arriesgar a mi familia que se quedaba en mi casa o quedarme y no tener para darle nada de comer a mis hijos. Entonces, mucho nos tocó salir a las calles y nos topamos con que pues, las ventas habían disminuido hasta en un 70%. Si en un día nosotros vendíamos $100, estábamos yendo a vender $30, $25. Entonces, fue algo que nos vino a dar un giro de 360 grados en nuestra economía. Hasta el sol de hoy, yo hablo con compañeros que deben su renta total desde que empezó la pandemia hasta el día de hoy, porque no se han podido levantar económicamente. Entonces, y a eso le sumamos los asaltos, el acoso de las autoridades, el miedo a la policía. Entonces, son demasiados paredes con las que tenemos que luchar para poder seguir trabajando. Gracias.
Thank you, Merlin, for giving us the perspective of what the reality. Christian gave us his perspective as a professional.
Perspectiva como
He tried to
profesional.
actually complete the process himself, but you brought it even further home in terms of the economic impacts, the impacts on your home, impacts on your ability to feed your family, impacts on your health, safety, well-being. This is the type of information that we not only need to hear amongst leadership, but we also need to hear even amongst bureaucrats and policymakers. And one of the things that I did do and had spoke to Rudy about is that we're fingers crossed. Senator Susan Rubio was invited to attend today's conversation, and she's very interested in being further engaged and connected to this issue because she really is a champion of not only our community, but she also is very connected to the issue of violence, and specifically domestic violence. She has authored legislation specifically around domestic violence, and this is an issue, obviously, that's related, both in terms of economics, in terms of health, well-being, as well as our community. And so as we pivot more towards sort of the policy conversation around what can be done, I would like to come back to Edin. And Edin, as an activist, as somebody who is providing resources to this community, I'd like to get your perspective on what you think can be done, should be done, particularly from a policy perspective.
I think from a policy perspective, it's close to impossible to avoid the violence that's been going on. I think that's more of a community economic situation between our communities. It's obviously we are under a pandemic. That's why we've seen a spike in these attacks because of the pandemic. A lot of folks are hungry, and they know that vendors have cash in their pockets and they're alone out in the streets. That is a very great question. That's something that to this day I'm still trying to figure out as far as what we can do on a policy level as to help them out from these attacks. But I think that's because of the pandemic and the economic crash that we've had. But from their perspective, from the people that we've helped since last year, I think it's been a great reception. They felt like they were alone, but they no longer feel that way, because folks like myself and Street Vendors United and Inclusive Action and CPC Colectivo being there and showing them that they're fighting on the legislative level. And then we have folks like myself being out there with them. For example, there's a vendor who he's legally blind. He came from Costa Rica, escaping violence. He got shot in the head in Costa Rica, still has the bullet in his head. He's legally blind. He was vending out here in downtown in Los Angeles, and he was brutally attacked, and he suffered several broken bones, broken leg, broken arm, and he didn't know where to go. And when we showed up, we went ahead and used our platform to fundraise for him. And we've had an average of, I think it's about 10 to 15 vendors that we helped from 2020, of an average of $10,000 each for the fundraising we've done. And that's helped them a little bit to get back on their feet. But I mean, obviously it's still not enough. We've had amazing folks like Christian and a team of lawyers who've helped them with obtaining their U visas and guiding them and working pro bono. And that has shown them that they are not alone. And I applaud the work that Inclusive Action and CPC is doing on the legislative level, because that's crucial. But on the policy level, that, like I said, I think that's a great question. That's a great question, but I think that's going to take some recovery, especially from the pandemic. And that's why we're helping vendors transition from, instead of having so much cash in their pockets, we're helping them transition to digital currency. So there's a lot of places, check cashing places, that even though you don't have a social security number, or if you don't have any citizenship, you can obtain a prepaid debit card, and you can start using Cash App, Venmo, Zelle, and you can start using that in the street where you won't be vulnerable enough to where, you know, you won't have that much money in your pockets. And on top of that, we also do provide body cameras and pepper spray. But I think the most important thing is having that on their cards that they are charging digitally. So, you know, for the folks that are hungry, don't know, maybe, you know what, they don't have that much cash in their pockets. Let's look somewhere else.
I love that you provided some very sort of concrete examples on what can be done in terms of the finance element, the cash element, obviously the violence element, things that you did personally. And I'd like to sort of elevate that conversation and think about how we can take those ideas, those grassroots interventions, both from a legal side as well as from a policy side. So Rudy, if you could comment on the policy work that your organization has been doing. I'm going to go ahead and put your report, links to your report, in the chat, and then we'll pivot to Christian from the legal perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I've been sort of following the work of Street Vendors United and other folks, some that are doing work to support vendors in need. And the LA Street Vendor Campaign put together an emergency fund, and we've been deploying cash cards over the last year and a half. And it's good work. And what I tell people is, hey, donate. Please donate, give us your money so we could give it out to vendors. But we need to think about the systemic issues that are at play. Because vendors like Medellin, who we admire and work hard, can't get their permits. And there's reasons for that. And so the report that was put out, there's a link there in the chat, provides some analysis of the current situation. And also some specific recommendations on what all levels of government can do to support street vendors. The reason why people are getting attacked, one of the reasons, is because we are not taking care of them as a community either. How can we expect other folks to, how can we expect vendors to be protected if we as a public sector are not protecting them either? And so I think we have a role to play. I actually kind of want to rope in Lisa into the conversation. So Lisa is a really important person in our work. She is someone that has a heavy job. The Department of Public Health has been so busy the last 2 years fighting a pandemic, and Lisa is also really responsible for managing the street vendor program in the county. She has a really tough job, but her job is really to enforce the laws that are currently in place. And I think that us as a community really need to work with her and her amazing team to think about how we can modernize the code where appropriate in order to protect the public health, but also to make sure that low-income street vendors can participate. So definitely check out the report and look at the recommendation. I could talk about that more, but Lisa, I don't know if you have any comments from your vantage point, because you deal with this every day.
No, thank you so much, Rudy. And first let me say that the county, of course, Department of Public Health does support food vending, but we need to support it in a safe and legal manner. And you're right, Rudy, we're delegated the authority, right, to go out and enforce rules. And I think that the challenge that we have with food vending is that it's really expanded to multiple type of avenues. And the laws don't necessarily allow that. And it's not just the state of California, but quite honestly, nationally. So we're really working hard to try and figure out how we can support, our food cart vendors, be able to expand what they currently are doing. We definitely are looking at the laws to see, where can we perhaps always keeping, because remember, our goal is to protect the public, right? To make sure that the food that's being prepared is safe, so that when people consume it, they're not going to get sick. Making sure that, of course, people have the ability to wash their hands, making sure that the food is being kept safe, making sure that it's being prepared in a safe manner. And so we need to keep that in mind as we look at some of the creative ways of being able to potentially look at the law and how could we do that in a safe manner. And I think that's the challenge that we're faced right now. And I think we've started it already. I mean, we've already had, the county has approved another plan for a hot holding cart that will allow, more foods to be able to be sold. But that's just one model, right? Food vending also takes on a different model, and that's the pop-up restaurants. And we often see, that's when inspectors are out and they're filmed throwing away food. And that's going to be another challenge. That's completely different because there is no mechanism today, whether it's the state of California or across the state, that allows people to just pop up and prepare food and serve the food to the public. There is a mechanism that I'd like to be able to explore with you, Rudy, and others, to be able to see whether or not, for example, Avenue 26. We've heard a lot about Avenue 26, but Avenue 26 is really a community event. It is somebody who, there's multiple food vendors. It's not just a cart or a food vendor that's out trying to sell food. It's a community event. And so if that's going to be something that, the cities or whoever wants to promote, then there should be an event organizer. So perhaps maybe one of your groups, can sponsor and really set up and say, you know what, we would like to have Avenue 26 set up and approved. There's an event organizer. They're provided the infrastructure needed to be able to provide a safe environment for people to be able to prepare food safely. That's a mechanism that we can explore to see how can we create a community event around food vending, right? So we have to be creative in how we approach the different issues. And it's not going to happen overnight. This is going to be something that unpermitted food vending has been around for how long? And we still haven't gotten it right. Even though, Senator Lada tried, yes, food vending, and that was, to some extent a different issue. The health department and the rules that have been in place for years and years and years. It's not something that just came up. So we are trying, like I say, to be as creative as we can, but always keeping in mind public health and what we need to do to make sure that the food that you're preparing is safe for those who are consuming it. And that's our role, right? Is to make sure that that's happening. So we want to continue the dialogue. I do want to let you know that I did invite public health councils to come and speak to the directors across the state who are in my position that have the ability to also think creatively on how we can approach this together so that we can come up with solutions. But there's going to be different solutions for the different types of food vending that exist. So thank you, Rudy.
No, I mean, Lisa, thank you. And I think that that's something that as we move forward together to really think about the economy that we need to understand like what are different roles that we play. And in the report, friends, the link is in the chat. The report that came out last week by Public Counsel in UCLA Law that was informed by Merlin and other vendors, you'll see really specific things that the city can do, that the county can do, and that the state can do. For example, in the county, we think that there's certain things that could happen now. We could pre-approve cart designs, which Lisa just mentioned. We could think about reducing permit costs. We could make sure that things are in Spanish in other languages that are commonly spoken. There's various things that could happen now, but we also need to think about state legislation. And Richard, I'm so happy that Senator Rubio is interested in thinking about this. There's various other leaders that want to help here, but everyone has a role to play. And the reason why we have to act with urgency, though, is because of what Merlin brought up and what Christian is seeing on the ground and what Eden is seeing on the ground. We really need to think, we need to work quickly. It's not going to happen overnight, but we can do a lot of work in the next 6 months or in the next legislative cycle if we work together.
And if I can just add, Rudy, I want to bring up something that, I really like you mentioned, this is our role too, right? We all have a role. And so, I would ask for not only, for us, we want to protect our food vendors, but we also need to protect our team that's out doing these inspections. So we have to figure out how to work together. I've heard many times, well, why does law enforcement come out, right, with health inspectors when we're doing inspections? And quite honestly, because we're just as threatened as some of, by food vendors and the customers that are buying the food. So I think we need to figure out a way to work together because we all have a role. My team, when they go out, they're going out to enforce the law. We don't want to have to bring the police with us, but we bring them because our team are being threatened. They're being assaulted. You know, they're being followed and run off the road. And we shouldn't be in that way. We really want to make sure that if you're going to be providing food, let's figure out a way that you can do it safely. And at the same time, let's work together to make sure that we can help each other, right? To me, that's our goal, is how can we do this safely?
I'm very thankful for the honest conversation, and not only in terms of opportunities from the policy level, and I love how Rudy articulated state, at local, county, and local opportunities, but also that there are realities on both sides that are challenging. I do also want to give Christian an opportunity to talk about a potential, any sort of legal pathways in order to create some of these synergies or some of these opportunities for folks to come together. Christian, and your thoughts in terms of what actions or steps can be taken to address some of the issues that have been shared today.
Well, I'm glad Ms. Frias talked about, you know, the bringing of police officers to inspections, because in the course of the last year, I've actually been contacted by several street vendors who were subjected to police violence, who were subjected to targeted attacks by governmental actors, and which were subjected to harassment to a certain extent. So while I appreciate Ms. Frias's point that, you know, these are people too, and, you know, they allegedly have been followed or, you know, treated a certain way, we're talking about public health inspectors with police officers as their personal bodyguards versus some of the most marginalized people in our community, people who are already scared, people who are already been subjected to other attacks. So I think you're right that there needs to be cooperation, because the more adversarial it gets, you know, the more conflict there's going to be. But at the same time, I think, you know, we should be more cognizant of the fact that these people are already being targeted and they're already being subjected to a slew of different attacks at all different levels. So, you know, the more pressure you put on them, the harder it is for them to cooperate in a manner that is consistent with the law. And like I mentioned before, and I'm glad Rudy brought up the unfinished business report, because I encourage everyone to read it. I'm glad I was in this webinar, this CharLA, because, you know, I didn't even read it, and I didn't know about it, frankly. And it's very comprehensive. I will defer to all the points in there, but in terms of amending the law, I think at the very least, we need to change the health and safety code. As Ms. Frias said, she's obligated to follow the law, of course. She's an enforcement officer. She's part of an enforcement agency, so she can't deviate from the health and safety code. You know, so what that means is that the health and safety code has to conform to what happened in the amendments to the law in Senate Bill 946. So I think, you know, there were amendments throughout the municipal code and different regulatory amendments, but really what's important is the amendments to the health and safety code so they could conform to the specific needs of street vendors. So that's one. That's number one in terms of, you know, the permits and people getting approval by their local municipalities. Number two, like I mentioned earlier, changes to the law in terms of how people who attack street vendors or people who target street vendors should also conform to the attacks that are tailored and unique to street vendors. So of course, street vendors are hesitant to report any attacks because they don't want to be subjected to potential ICE enforcement or potential documentation of who they are and their information. You know, this even happens in my own practice when we report some sort of crime to the police. That police report then becomes public, and then that information can be viewed by anyone. So that person is now documented, they could be tracked. And of course, someone who is not documented or someone who is marginalized will not want to report their information because then, they may be exposed. So I think another part to it too is setting aside these convictions. So, with SB 946, there was the opportunity for people who were convicted of street vending or cited for street vending to set aside that conviction. So that's one of the services that I offer pro bono is I help street vendors set aside any convictions or any pending criminal charges based upon street vending, and it's something that is submitted to the court, which originates the charge or the criminal charge against this person. So, the awareness and of course the overall change to the law is really what needs to happen in order for these people to be more protected. Because, look, at the end of the day, this is a capitalistic society. We do live in a capitalistic economy. So what that means is it encourages competition. It encourages people to actually be innovative. So what's more innovative than someone who is selling food in their local neighborhood? And there's nothing more Angelino than your taco stand. There's nothing more Angelino than your corn man, your elotero. So these are the people that are the backbone of our communities, and it's people who we should prioritize in protecting and prioritize and ensuring that they are given the proper resources to move ahead.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate that succinct analysis and recommendation at a variety of different levels, whether it's in the permitting process, whether it's in on the law enforcement side, or specifically on the legal side in terms of the enforcement or citations, and really creating an environment in which people are allowed to be their entrepreneurial best selves, but in which they're able to be safe, and in which also they're able to be successful. And that kind of sets the groundwork for the final question, which is opportunities for local advocates, county agencies, and state legislators to work together. And I'm interested in, obviously, as the interim executive director of the United Latinx Fund, I'm interested in identifying any ways in which we can create change, positive change, and invest in change. Our funding priorities are jobs and housing. These are jobs, right? And so specifically, Christian, I'd like, and Rudy as well, and Lisa, I'd like to maybe focus on the licensing process initially. What ways are there for us to work together to be able to make this process easier, quicker, faster, more transparent? And I'm willing to take any ideas from anybody. Edin, I think unmute yourself.
So, Lisa, thank you for your comments, and I understand both sides, but I agree with 100% with what Christian said. So I've been building a database of all street vendors in Los Angeles County. If you ever need to talk to anyone without the need of law enforcement, I've been building rapport with hundreds of street vendors here in Los Angeles County. I think it would be great if you and I were to work together as far as building, they trust me and I trust that Los Angeles County is very progressive when it comes to immigration. And I understand that we are a sanctuary state. So, if you ever need help with that, I think that would be great. Because like I said, I do have that rapport with hundreds of vendors in Los Angeles County. So you don't have to show up with law enforcement if you ever need anyone to mitigate that. And definitely the process. And there's a lot of reasons why they don't come across, they don't initiate a permit process because of the immigration. That's number one, right? And we also have them, the fear of them being exposed and being deported. But I would also like to look at the statistics. I had a report here, but I can't find it right now. The statistics of hospitalizations from vendors, street vending, and how low they were compared per capita with restaurants that are approved by the LA Health Department. And I'm not sure if you might have that on hand right now, but I think that would be very important. But as far as that bridge, of you being able to come in contact with the people that I built rapport with, and like I said, I'm building a database. And if you ever need to, hey, Eden, I'm trying to get a hold of this street vendor who's on so-and-so intersection, then we can work together without having law enforcement involved. And it would be more of an amicable thing instead of a hostile situation.
Love that.
Thank you.
And I'd also want to give Merlin an opportunity also to share her thoughts on ways in which we can all work together specifically around licensing. And then I'm going to pivot to law enforcement. So Merlin and Victor, if you can activate the translation, that would be great.
Muchísimas gracias. Yo quería compartir algo y quería que Lisa lo escuchara.
And I
Gracias.
want Lisa to
Voy a hablar de mi
hear it.
experiencia
I will-
personal y de algunas experiencias que han vivido mis compañeros. Yo soy un vivo ejemplo de que los vendedores no tenemos el permiso porque no hay algo que nos dé permiso de trabajar en la banqueta. Yo tengo aproximadamente 15 años de ser vendedora ambulante en todas las áreas de Los Ángeles. En este momento trabajo en el Paseo de las Estrellas de Hollywood, pero he sido vendedora de los callejones, del downtown, del área del Alvarado, de muchísimas áreas de Los Ángeles. En esos años he sido víctima del Departamento de Salubridad muchísimas veces, muchísimas, incontables. Escuché que iba a haber permiso para los carritos de fruta de la banqueta de fruta picada y yo compré mi carro. Fui donde un manufacturero, lo coticé, me dio precios. Yo no tenía el dinero para comprarlo, hice un préstamo para poder comprarlo. Y el día que yo tengo mi cita en el Departamento de Salubridad, me topo con la primera pared de concreto, que es que si no tengo un ID de California, yo no puedo sacar el permiso. Yo creo que el 80% de los vendedores ambulantes, si no hasta más, somos inmigrantes no legalizados, que no contamos con un seguro social, que no contamos con un ID de Estados Unidos, de California. Tenemos de nuestro país, pero no de aquí. Entonces yo pienso que me gusta que Lisa esté escuchando esto, porque esa es una de las primeras cosas que se tiene que trabajar. El otro día yo escuchaba que decían en las noticias, de casi 10,000 vendedores que hay en la ciudad de Los Ángeles, como 200 han sacado su permiso de la banqueta. Hoy yo les voy a contestar por qué. Porque casi el 90% de los vendedores ambulantes de Los Ángeles somos vendedores de comida. Entonces, al no haber un proceso en el que nosotros podamos legalizarnos, es como tirar nuestro dinero a la basura e invertir en un permiso que igual no nos vale de nada. Otra cosa, el hecho, gracias a Dios, en mi experiencia personal, yo tengo a alguien en mi familia muy cercana que él tenía un ID de California y él pudo sacar el permiso a nombre de él y poner el carrito a nombre de él y yo poderlo trabajar. Pero esto también nos hace víctimas de fraude, porque alguien muy cercano, compañero mío, él vende en el área de Bonibrea, se llama Miguel. Llegaba a Salubridad, quitaban y todo eso. Y a él le hablaron bonito de comprarse una troca de las que van debajo de la banqueta, que son aprobadas por Salubridad. Y no sé si estoy segura si le costó 25,000 o 30,000 dólares, pero por ahí oscilaba. Él le pidió el favor a alguien que le hiciera el favor de sacar la nombre de esa persona porque él no tenía papeles. No sé si la sacó al crédito, si la pagó en un total, pero la persona le hizo el favor. En un lapso de 5 meses, cuando llegó Salubridad, él no tenía sus cosas como las tenía que tener. No sé, tal vez tenía algo fuera de la ley que Salubridad no lo permitía y le clausuraron su permiso. Tenía que reparar todo eso, hacer una cita con Salubridad y dar algunas vueltas. Él vino y le pidió a la persona que estaba a nombre del carro que si por favor le podía ayudar a hacer esas vueltas. Esa persona le contestó que sí, pero le dijo esto: me pagas $200 el día y yo voy contigo a hacer esas vueltas. Entonces él vino y dijo, no, pues no te puedo pagar porque yo no estoy trabajando. Pero ¿sabes qué? Mi hijo ya cumplió 18 años. Voy a pasar la troca y los permisos, ya él me los va a poder sacar por ser mayor de edad. Y esa persona vino y le contestó, ok, a ti te costó 30,000 la troca, dame 5,000 y yo te paso todo porque pues los papeles están a nombre mío. Entonces los papeles dicen que el carro es mío. Entonces todo eso nos hace víctimas de una cadena incontable de fraudes, de cosas que se nos salen de las manos. Entonces, a lo que voy y que yo quería que ella escuchara es que si nos dieran la oportunidad, los vendedores tenemos la disponibilidad de trabajar de la mano con el Departamento de Salubridad. Yo tengo un carro de fruta con permiso que tengo 2 años que no lo trabajo y sigo pagando su permiso y sigo pagando 250 de comisaría cada mes para que no me suspendan mi permiso. Y no lo trabajo porque en el área que yo trabajo, que es el Paseo de las Estrellas, en el 2018 que pasó la ley, fue una área de las áreas excluidas dentro de la ley. Entonces, de nada me sirvió hacer mi inversión con tanto anhelo y todo, porque cuando la ley pasó, excluyeron mi área. Y muchas veces me han dicho, no, pero sería más fácil que buscaras otra área y te fueras a vender a otro lado, ¿no? Pero no es fácil porque es como renunciar a todo y darles el ok y decirles, sí, está bien, yo prefiero seguir luchando y llegar a conseguir algo. Porque como tienen derecho a usar en cualquier banqueta, yo también tengo derecho a usarla si estoy dentro de la ley. Entonces yo prefiero seguir en la lucha hasta que nosotros logremos ganar algo en Hollywood. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Marlene. Thank you. Victor, if you could switch the interpretation, thank you.
Gracias.
What I'm hearing from all of this is I'm hearing some opportunity, specifically around the need and the requirements for some identification. I am texting the senator and asking her to join us. So hopefully she will join us because I want to hear a little bit more. And since this conversation is being recorded, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what can be done at the state level. We have relationships at the state that we work with on many policy issues. And so if there's issues around identification, if there's issues that only the state can address, I would definitely like to hear from Lisa about that and her perspective in terms of challenges, things that you may want to do, Lisa, but you can't do because of any sort of state policies or limitations. Could you share a little bit about that with us, Lisa?
Sure. So as far as the ID, I'm not aware of them, any vendor not being able to get a permit because they don't have a California's driver's license. So I can follow up as part of that. But from a state law perspective, I think, for us, and when I say us, the world of food safety and the role that we have to make sure that food is being prepared safely, we have some basic, risk factors that we have to address. And so the areas that I've had many conversations with Rudy over as far as what can we do to look at within the law and within the California Retail Food Code that perhaps could be looked at differently, or that we can meet the same requirements to make sure that food is prepared safely in a different manner. The reality of it is any business, whether it's a sidewalk vendor, whether it's a brick and mortar, whether it's like I was talking about a community event food booth, everybody has to be able to, have some basic minimum food safety requirements in place. And so I think at the state level, and I'd be interested, to see, what others think, but we all have a responsibility to make sure that food is prepared safely. and that we meet that with hand washing requirements, right? Being able to make sure that food is kept hot or cold, depending on, what food is being prepared, how that food is being stored and held. The equipment that's being used to serve that food needs to be, of course, clean and sanitized. These are all basic requirements that anybody who's preparing food has to do, and it's based on science. And so I think any law that needs to be changed or can be changed, you still have to be able to assure that food is going to be handled to address those critical risk factors. So I think for us, what we're looking at is, even as part of this pilot, one of the biggest barriers, and that's why I'm going to be very clear on the world of the food cart world is one that I think we can really work towards coming to solutions. And I've always said the struggle is there's not enough food cart out, enough food carts that are available that meet code requirements. First of all, I think we need to get more, carts out there, and by having, a model plan that manufacturers can perhaps use to build carts. And like you say, it's capitalism. So once again, there's going to be some who are going to be able to produce it and hopefully produce carts that are, more cost efficient, I guess. But the world of the pop-up vendor, and that's where I think we really have to get creative, is going to be more challenging. Unless we come through this as a community event, there is no mechanism right now that's going to allow anybody to just pop up, bring out equipment, park on the sidewalk and prepare foods without having the infrastructure that's needed. So I think right now, focusing in on getting more food cart vendors to be able to come into the economy, to be able to get permits, and really looking at perhaps the 3-compartment sink requirement. That's the one that I think, we always hear about the size of carts. And what is the model that wants, is it somebody who wants to stay in place, or is it truly a food cart vendor that, moves? Because there's different models, but the 3-compartment sink is probably the most challenging because that's what makes it larger. And then being able to figure out, you still have to have clean utensils. So perhaps they bring additional utensils. And so those are the things that we have to think about creatively to be able to say, okay, you know what, we have this basic core public health principle. And at the end of the day, you have to be able to meet that. That's a basic requirement that has to be met no matter what in any area. So I think that's what I would say is we really got to look at how do we address those core public health principles as we move forward in state law and try to change those. I don't think you're going to have anybody that's going to say it's okay not to wash your hands.
So we are at the point of the conversation where we went a little bit over because we had some really good conversation that I wanted to allow to move forward. But Victor has promoted everybody to be a panelist, and you're free to turn on your video and your audio as you see fit. And I want to allow for members of our attendees who have joined us today and spent time with us over the past hour. I want to give them an opportunity to ask some questions. And Ingrid, I'd like to turn it over to you. I know you've been monitoring our chat box. Are there any questions from the collective audience and attendees that you think have gone unanswered?
I think one of the major themes that continues to come up is the fact that, one, the process to get a permit is not only complicated, but more difficult for those who don't have legal status, but two, that it just takes too long, that it's a very slow process, and that there's also very slow response from Department of Public Health to get these permits available. So that's something that continues to come up as we've been monitoring the chat box.
What do you want me to do? Oh, we have somebody on, you can hear some background noise. Eden, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, to rebuttal your concerns. Actually, Street Vendors United had the idea of paying for OSHA certification for all the vendors to clear those concerns that you have. I don't know what's your idea about that, since, like I said, there's a lot of reasons why they don't reach out or they can't go through the process, whether it's identification or whichever the reason is. But the OSHA certification would kind of ease your concerns. And I don't know what your thoughts about that would be, but that was an initial plan that Street Vendors United had in order to mitigate that concern.
I guess, Eden, I have to understand a little bit more as far as the OSHA certification. I don't know. I'm not familiar with what certification you're talking about.
So it's basically a certification for vendors as far as cleanliness and serving food.
Are you talking about certified food manager certification? Because
yeah, when it comes to hygiene, when it comes to cleanliness, as far as how to basically, I don't have the paperwork in front of me right now, but that's something that we have thought of because of that bridge missing between DPH and the vendors, where they can get certified as far as being having the right techniques and the right certification as far as how controlling food.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's something, you know, that's actually required. So anybody who is handling food has to have, you know, so anybody who works in any food industry right now has to have a food handler card if they're going to be handling open food. If they're owning, you know, they have to have a food manager certification. So that's already required, but you still have to have the infrastructure to be able to carry out those basic food safety factors that are being trained on. So, you know, hand washing, like say, in order for you to be able to wash your hands, you have to have a hand washing sink. You know, when you talk about food temperatures, you need to be able to make sure that you keep food hot or you keep food cold, and you have thermometers. And so to me, I think, you know, one of the things that I've read in the chat, and, you know, as far as making the process easier, I admit that, you know what, we need to do a better job of making sure that we communicate in both English and Spanish and try to outline it, you know, so that it's very easily, you know, understood. But quite honestly, it's going to continue to be a challenge until we're able to build more carts, until you have more carts that are available, right, that meet the requirements, so that you have people that can come buy a cart, whether, you know, and hopefully it's a cost-effective cart that can be sold and used so that you can get a permit. Because it is challenging right now as a vendor, you know, you have to have a cart. And so how are you going to get a cart if there's no carts out there that are code compliant? And we do have carts, don't get me wrong. We have, you know, 5,500 food carts right now that are permitted. There are carts that are permitted. But what I hear when we have conversations with Rudy is that, you know what, we want to have more carts where we can actually do, you know, elotes, where we can do some additional food items. Well, we need to look at those carts, fruit carts. We know right now people want to go, I mean, I'm Latina, you know, you want to go to your fruit cart vendor and you want them to cut the fruit right in front of you. And we know that that's not allowed right now. So how do we work on building a food cart that you can sell, you can cut and slice fruit, right? And that cart can be, you know, built so that many people have access to carts. We need manufacturers. That's where I really, from an advocacy perspective, we need to get people to help build carts so that people have more access to that.
Richard, can I just jump in here? I know you're trying to close here, sir, but I wanted to just make sure that we're centering ourselves on the next steps.
Well, I was about to do that. Go ahead. Go ahead, Rudy.
What Lisa is saying is accurate. And I want everybody here to understand that in order for us to really make sure that vendors are part of our economy, we definitely need more carts. We need to protect public safety and public health. But we cannot do that unless we modernize the state California Retail Food Code. The Retail Food Code is what comes down to all counties and provides the guidance for all our public health departments on how they should implement this law. And right now, the state code is so restrictive that manufacturers are unwilling to build carts because it's so difficult and so expensive, and there's no market for those expensive carts. So for anybody that's listening or will listen to this later, we really need everybody's support to call your state legislator, your senator, your assembly member and say, hey, this is really important. We need to look at the California Retail Food Code. There's a lot of amazing local leaders, including Lisa and Christian and Eden and Medellin, of course, that really need such solutions and have the expertise. And we need to look at that California Retail Food Code so we can build affordable carts and protect public health.
And Rudy, thank you for reading my mind, because what I was going to recommend is a subsequent follow-up conversation, Rudy, where we sort of killed two birds with one stone, maybe three birds with one stone. And this is sort of the conclusion. We have some comments in the chat. I do want to acknowledge our partner, longstanding partner and host, LCLA. They are doing a fundraiser. So I want to make sure that we give a shout out and acknowledgement to them and the opportunity to give. So thank you for putting that in the chat box, Ingrid and Victor. And also to Rudy's point, United Latinx Fund does a lot of policy advocacy. Specifically, we're actually doing a lot of work in the housing and homeless issue and sector. And as luck would have it, we have developed strong relationships with prefabrication and manufacturers. We also have strong relationships in Sacramento. So I'm wondering, Rudy, if ULF might be able to hold a roundtable conversation with legislators, as well as obviously local vendors, and be able to talk about reimagine the code, the health and safety code around food preparation, and simultaneously also invite manufacturers, particularly folks who specialize in prefab manufacturing, and be able to think about what would that look like going forward? What would those new policies, what would the new carts look like? What would the price points need to be? And then at the same time, several of my staff have been sharing opportunities for ULF to facilitate licensing, particularly, as Lisa said, the bilingual element and component, which obviously, Rudy, you've done a lot of work in that space. So maybe helping to maybe amplify some of that licensing support is something also we can do. So I'm interested in continuing the conversation. I did want to allow Ingrid to close out. Ingrid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And thank you so much for our panelists, for all the hard work that you're doing and for your commitment to this issue. And I really want to say thank you to Marlene. I think that her testimony really, if nothing else, hit home to me in my heart, and the beautiful dedication of street vendors, their love to work and to provide for their families and to be a part of this country. And I think if we as Californians, pride ourselves on being a sanctuary city, then we really need to provide those avenues and those doors to make it accessible for our folks who are community members, right? Who love this country and who are here to really make their lives better and make our lives better through the delicious and safe and clean food that they provide to us. So muchas gracias, Marlene, por estar esta noche, por estar aquí con nosotros esta noche. La verdad, de mi corazón a su corazón, gracias. Y gracias a todos sus compañeros que están afuera en las calles proviéndonos comida. Y buenas noches a todos. Thank you, everyone. Please reach out to ULF, to LCLA, if you guys want to continue the work. Thank you.
Can I add one last thing? I'm sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate the concern about cleanliness, and that's the only thing I wanted to touch base was that the OSHA certification would take away the concern about washing hands. They'll give them proper guidance for vendors that are not willing to go through that process. Also, since we're talking about cleanliness, and this is just constructive criticism, SoCal Gas, has polluted a lot of Black and brown communities. And maybe we should think twice of who we choose as our sponsors. Thank you.
Eden, I love that feedback. And I actually invite you personally to attend the next CharLA next month, where a lot of those issues that you just spoke about are going to be addressed by not only representatives of Southern California Gas Company, but also policy leaders, as well as communities like Lancaster that are looking to embrace green hydrogen that would also provide sustainable jobs for many of our Black and brown folks, as well as an opportunity to advance a clean future in a more sustainable way, in a more green fashion. So I'm glad that you brought that up. let's hold our sponsors accountable, and let's also give them an opportunity to do better with our support, because that's the only way they're going to do it. I want to thank all of you for attending tonight's conversation. I invite you, I usually invite everybody to the next conversation, but thank you, Edine, for teeing that up for us. And please join us next month, where we'll be talking with SoCal Gas around green hydrogen and Latinx job opportunities into the future.
Definitely, because there's a lot of things that they're currently doing that we can touch base next time, for sure.
Please, absolutely, I invite you. Please come. Thank you. All right, everybody. Have a good night.